While Perkins felt his problems didn't amount to much, his 40-year career and accomplishments do indeed.
At 32, Anthony Perkins received a late-night call that nearly shattered him. A gossip columnist threatened to expose his secret affairs with men, promising to publish names if Perkins refused to play along. For a rising star still defined by Psycho, the threat was devastating. Exposure meant career ruin, studio abandonment, and public humiliation in a time when homosexuality was branded a crime. That moment marked the turning point of his life, when fear and desire collided under the brightest lights of Hollywood. But to understand how Perkins reached such a crossroads, we must first step back to his beginnings. Anthony Perkins was born in 1,932 inches, New York City, into a family already tied to the stage. His father, Osgood Perkins, had made his name as a distinguished Broadway actor, admired for his elegance and voice. Yet his sudden death when Anthony was only 5 left the boy adrift. His mother, Janet Esselstyn, shouldered the weight of raising him, but their relationship was distant, even cold. Perkins grew up shy, awkward, and deeply insecure, traits that would later seep into the fragile characters he played on screen. The 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds were a world of contrasts. Big band music filled the air, crooners like Bing Crosby and Sinatra dominated the radio, and glamorous film stars lit up cinema screens across America. But the atmosphere carried an unspoken rigidity. Masculinity was strictly policed. Anything outside the narrow boundaries of heterosexual norms was condemned as immoral or dangerous. Psychiatry labeled homosexuality a sickness. Laws in many states still sent men to jail simply for being caught together. This was the climate in which Anthony Perkins came of age. As a teenager, he found escape in the theater. Plays offered him a refuge, a place where he could disappear into characters more confident than he ever felt himself to be. He spent hours imitating voices, rehearsing gestures in the mirror, and listening to cast recordings of Broadway shows. In boarding schools and later at Rollins College in Florida, he became known as the lanky, sensitive boy, with piercing eyes, who seemed almost born for the stage. Yet those who knew him also noticed his guardedness, his reluctance to reveal his inner life. By the late 1,940 seconds, Hollywood was preparing for a new wave of talent. The war was over, television was on the rise, and the movie industry craved young actors who could embody the anxieties and dreams of a changing generation. Perkins, tall and thin, with a haunted quality behind his smile, seemed made for this new era. His path from uncertain youth to national recognition was about to begin, propelled by both his natural gifts and the emotional wounds that never quite healed. Anthony Perkins arrived in Hollywood at the dawn of the 1,950 seconds, a time when the studios still controlled every aspect of a young actor's life. He was tall, 6'2", with a lean, angular frame and an air of boyish vulnerability. Casting directors saw something different in him, something that stood out against the square-jawed leading men of the day. His first screen appearances were small, almost tentative, but critics quickly took note of his raw presence. His breakthrough came in 1956 with Friendly Persuasion, a quiet Quaker drama directed by William Wyler. Perkins played the sensitive son of Gary Cooper's character, and his performance won him a Golden Globe as Most Promising Newcomer. Along with an Academy Award nomination, practically overnight, he became a new kind of star. Young women adored him, drawn to his awkward charm. Magazines placed his face on their covers, presenting him as the ideal boy next door. Yet beneath the surface, Perkins was consumed by nerves, always worrying he would be found lacking. In the years that followed, Hollywood worked to mold him into a romantic lead. He starred opposite Sophia Loren in Desire Under the Elms and Audrey Hepburn in Green Mansions, but he was not comfortable in the role of heartthrob. He lacked the easy confidence of Rock Hudson or Tony Curtis. His intensity came from a different place, a deep well of insecurity that made him magnetic in darker, more complex roles. On Broadway, he dazzled in Look Homeward Angel, showing he could carry a stage as easily as a screen. Then, in 1960, came the role that would define his entire career. Norman Bates, in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The part was risky. Studios hesitated. Perkins was still marketed as a matinee idol, and playing a repressed, knife-wielding motel owner could have ended that image overnight. Yet Hitchcock insisted. Perkins brought layers of humanity to Norman, making him both terrifying and heartbreaking. The performance was electrifying. Audiences gasped, critics marveled, and Perkins was forever etched into cinema history. But stardom came with a double edge. While Psycho made him immortal, it also trapped him. Studios struggled to see him as anything other than the haunted figure behind the Bates Motel desk. Perkins knew his career depended on balancing the image of sensitive leading man with the shadow of Norman Bates. And all the while, another shadow pressed closer. The secret life he could not reveal. Behind the flashing bulbs and glossy studio photographs, Anthony Perkins lived in constant tension. Hollywood, in the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds, demanded heterosexual perfection. Studios arranged dates, published rumors, and even staged romances to sell the illusion. Perkins, though, was quietly drawn to men. In private, among trusted circles, he explored parts of himself he could never show in public. One of his earliest significant relationships was with actor Tab Hunter. Both were rising stars, both marketed as clean-cut dreamboats for teenage audiences, and both carefully monitored by studio publicists. They met at a Hollywood hotel pool, their connection immediate. Friends recalled that their romance lasted several years, though always in secrecy. They attended theaters separately, slipping into the same row only after the lights went down. Studio executives, fearful of scandal, often paired them with female co-stars for publicity shots. While behind the curtain, Perkins and Hunter built a fragile love in whispers and late-night visits. Perkins was also connected to other men in Hollywood's hidden network. Sal Mineo, known for Rebel Without a Cause, was one of them. Biographers note that their bond was less public, more coded, but part of a web of young actors who found solace with one another in an unforgiving industry. There were rumors, too, of brief encounters with Rock Hudson, a man who carried even greater burdens as the era's leading romantic icon. Each relationship was shadowed by fear. If a gossip columnist caught them together, the consequences could be catastrophic. The studios controlled more than their roles. Contracts contained morality clauses. Being exposed as gay could end a career overnight. Perkins, already typecast after Psycho, could not afford another label attached to his name. He became cautious, even paranoid. Dates were arranged in private homes, on drives along the coast, in borrowed apartments. There were no public dinners, no affectionate gestures where cameras might intrude. Love had to exist in fragments, stitched together in the margins of fame. Yet these stolen moments gave him strength. Perkins was shy, even painfully so, but in intimacy he found tenderness and acceptance. Tab Hunter later described him as sensitive, deeply aware of the masks both men were forced to wear. That shared understanding was both a comfort and a curse. Every embrace carried the risk of exposure. Every secret rendezvous could be the one that ended everything. And then came the threat that made those risks terrifyingly real. A gossip columnist calling with promises to expose names. The walls around Perkins's private life began to tremble. The phone call came late, a voice dripping with menace. A gossip columnist claimed to know everything. The men Perkins had loved. The names whispered only in safe rooms. Unless he cooperated, unless he fed stories or played along, it would all go to print. For Anthony Perkins, the threat was suffocating. His entire career, so carefully built, could collapse with a single headline. This was the early 1,960 seconds, the height of Hollywood's moral stranglehold. The Hays Code still ruled, forbidding anything that hinted at homosexuality. Studios buried scandals at any cost. Perkins, already marked as Norman Bates in the public imagination, risked becoming a double outcast. Typecast as a killer on screen and condemned as deviant off it. Fear turned into physical pain. He grew thinner, more nervous, always looking over his shoulder. Roles began to slip away. After Psycho, he should have had his pick of scripts. Instead, offers dwindled. Directors doubted audiences could see him as anything but a troubled man. Rumors of his private life, though never splashed across tabloids, still circulated in industry whispers. Producers hesitated. Contracts dried up. His once bright career dimmed, not in a blaze of scandal, but in a slow suffocation of silence. The emotional toll was crushing. Friends noticed his loneliness, how he filled hotel rooms with music to drown out thoughts. He avoided interviews where personal questions might corner him. He retreated into himself, building a fragile armor of wit and charm that barely concealed the fear beneath. Hollywood demanded smiles for cameras, but inside, he was unraveling. By the late 1960 seconds, the isolation deepened. His relationship with Tab Hunter had ended under the weight of secrecy. Other romances flickered but could not survive the constant hiding. The pressure to conform grew heavier, and Perkins, exhausted, sought safety and distance, often fleeing to Europe for film roles that carried less scrutiny. Yet even abroad, he could never escape the shadow of exposure. The threat hung over him like a permanent storm cloud. It was a personal low, a point where fame felt more like a prison than a gift. The man who once embodied youthful promise now carried the look of someone haunted, not just by Norman Bates, but by his own unspoken truth. By the 1970 seconds, Anthony Perkins found himself caught between the ghost of Norman Bates and the changing world outside. The industry had shifted, the old studio system was fading, the Hays Code was gone, and directors were pushing bolder stories. Yet Perkins was still seen through the lens of Psycho. He took roles in European thrillers, often playing variations of the anxious outsider. Though the paychecks kept him working, they reinforced the box he longed to escape. In private, life brought new turns. In 1973, he met photographer and actress Barry Berenson, a free-spirited woman from a family of artists. Their relationship surprised many. For the first time, Perkins stepped into a public romance, and in 1973, they married. They had 2 sons, Osgood and Elvis, and for a while he lived what appeared to be a traditional family life. But those close to him knew his story was more complicated. Marriage did not erase his history or the loves he had kept hidden. Instead, it gave him stability, a partner who understood his complexities and loved him without demanding he erase his past. As the years passed, he began to reflect on what secrecy had cost him. The AIDS crisis of the 1980 seconds struck his community hard. Friends, colleagues, and rumored lovers were dying, their names whispered with fear. Perkins himself contracted the virus, though he kept it quiet for years. He continued to work, reprising Norman Bates in sequels, often speaking of the character with a strange fondness, as though Bates had become both his curse and his shield. In interviews, he remained guarded, careful never to reveal more than he intended. By the early 1990 seconds, illness had weakened him. In rare, candid moments, he acknowledged the loneliness of his double life. He admitted that secrecy had shaped him, made him both cautious and intensely sensitive. Yet he also believed his struggles had given depth to his art, allowing him to embody vulnerability on screen in a way audiences could feel. To those who met him late in life, he seemed gentler, almost resigned, but with flashes of humor that reminded them of the boyish star from decades earlier. Anthony Perkins died in 1992 at only 60. His passing, from AIDS-related pneumonia, shocked the public. Only then did many realize the quiet battles he had fought. For his family, his sons, and those who had loved him in secret, his death carried both grief and a bittersweet sense of release. At last, the weight of concealment was gone. Anthony Perkins's story is not only the tale of an actor, but also a portrait of survival in a time of silence. He lived within the tight grip of Hollywood illusion, where every smile on a magazine cover hid a shadow, and every love risked destruction. His brilliance on screen was born from those shadows, from the same fear and longing that marked his private life. In Norman Bates, audiences saw terror. In Perkins himself, there was tenderness, pain, and a yearning for freedom that could rarely be named. His journey reminds us that love, when forced into hiding, becomes both a refuge and a burden. The men he cared for, the secrecy he endured, and the price he paid are part of a larger history of voices muted by stigma. Yet even in silence, he left a legacy. His performances still echo with vulnerability. His life, though filled with caution, also carried resilience. When we look back at Anthony Perkins today, we see more than the man behind Psycho. We see a human being who tried to balance art, family, and forbidden love in a world not yet ready to accept him. His story invites us to ask, how many others lived and died under the same weight, never able to speak their truth? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Anthony Perkins differently now? Remember to subscribe for more hidden histories of Hollywood, where the glamour hides deeper truths about love, fear, and the cost of survival.